All right, good evening. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight for this installment in Preservation Resource Center's latest online series of dialogues with contemporary architects and practitioners in our city called Building New Orleans Then and Now. My name is Nathan Lott. I am Policy Research Director and Advocacy Coordinator for Preservation Resource Center. A little bit about our organization. If you're here, you probably know. You've found out through our social media, or perhaps you're on our email list. But we are a member-driven organization, and our online home is prcno.org. And if you're not already a member, we would love for you to become a member of the Preservation Resource Center. And when you do that, you will receive, amongst other benefits, our magazine, Preservation in Print, which comes out almost monthly with a brief hiatus in July and August, and contains all sorts of interesting information about the history of our city and our state, and also lots of practical information for people that want to rehab a house, and lots of inspiring stories about people who have done preservation work to keep our city special, preserve not just the architecture, but the neighborhoods, the cultural identity that makes New Orleans such a unique place to call home. Also, want to let you know about a special event we have going on right now. During the pandemic, we've been able to step up our online offerings like this one and continue our educational mission online. But some of our fundraising opportunities that we normally do have been more challenging. So this year, instead of having a gala, we are having a gala-vant. What is that, you ask? Well, it's a run, walk, bike opportunity. And for just $30, you can sign up. You get a special brochure with guides to several routes around the city. You could do a half marathon, or you can do the 1 mile family fun run. And it's really scalable. You can do them, as I said, by bike or on foot. And even the one along Bayou St. John, you can do by kayak if you're so inclined. But when you do that, all of the proceeds go to support our educational work and our work in the community, including our Revival Grants program, which helps low-income homeowners stay in their homes and repair them and fix them up in historic Treme neighborhood. And I'm joined tonight by my colleague, Anna Perez, who manages that program and also manages our building conservation education programs, including a new series that she's going to tell us a little bit about. But Anna, thank you so much for joining us. And I won't give you a full introduction, but I'll say people should pick up the latest copy of Preservation in Print, and they can learn more about Anna's background.
Yes, thank you so much, Nathan, for letting me co-host with you tonight. And thank you, Jenny, again, for working with us to make this happen. I am the Director of Conservation and Education. I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. I'm working on launching the new Maintain Right series to empower homeowners with the knowledge to spot potential problems with their historic buildings and ways to address them, including who to call when problems require a professional. I want to give thanks to the generous support of the Louisiana State Historic Preservation Office and the Joanna Favreau Fund for Historic Preservation for the National Trust. They've really made this Maintain Right series happen. You can find more information in the May issue, like Nathan had mentioned, of the Preservation in Print, and updates will be coming up on our website at prcno.org. The Maintain Right series will be launching a series of short videos later this month, and we will also be hosting in-depth conversations and presentations with professionals on just really common issues. And today, I'm excited to get that started with Jenny and Nathan. Thank you again.
All right. Yes, now let me introduce our guest. And we are very honored today to have joining us Jennie Cannon West, who's not only a member of the American Institute of Architects, but also accredited interior designer and a lead accredited designer. She is based here in New Orleans and is the founder and principal of Studio West Design and Architecture. Jennie's a champion for team building and collaboration. She has a personal passion for both interiors and historic preservation. And her work marries those two, as she's going to tell us about tonight. So Jennie is a native of Nashville, and she has a dual degree in architecture and interior design from the College of Design and Construction in Auburn, where she is an alum of the very well-renowned Rural Studio program. She did some studying that brought her to New Orleans, and after graduating, she wound up coming here permanently in 2009, practiced with several notable firms, including Esky, Dumas, Ripple, and then took the leap and started her own studio. In addition to her work as a designer, she's also a volunteer member of the New Orleans Historic District Landmarks Commission, where she represents the Bywater neighborhood where she's a resident. And I can tell you that Jennie's experience as an architect is valued by other members of the Historic District Landmarks Commission. That commission brings together people from all over the city, but also a real variety of skill sets. And I know that Jennie and her colleague Greg, who's also an architect, bring a lot to the table based on their kind of practical experience. And I think hopefully she takes something back to her work from that service to our community by serving on the HDLC. So Jennie, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Nathan. Thank you for having me. And thank you to Anna and Laurel as well. I know she was doing a lot of work behind the scenes, but I really appreciate y'all kind of pushing and wrangling all the architects for this group of conversations over the last few weeks and the ones that will continue. So thank you.
Yes,
all right,
I was remiss not to thank Laurel Fay, our intern, who helped pull so much of this together, and also Daniil, who is our behind the scenes tech whiz and DJ. So
yeah, so give me 1 second, sharing my screen now.
Alrighty.
All right, can y'all see? Sorry, the one thing we did beforehand was talk, but we did not practice sharing the screen. So thanks to everyone. We were busy catching up. Right. So yeah, I want to make sure so everyone can see this now. So I'll go back, but I'm all right, sorry. So we'll start here. So thanks to everyone for joining us this evening. We're looking forward to the conversation about talking about the inside as well as the exterior of quite a few historic structures. Again, as Nathan did the introduction, I'm Jennie West, founder and principal at Studio West. We're a very small group of really dedicated and passionate designers that love working on historic structures, but also like working on more modern things as well. So I'm excited to give you just a taste of that tonight. And also just sort of give you some background as to why, as someone from out of town, serving volunteer on the HDLC board, who is a transplant, proud of it, but has really fallen in love with New Orleans and loves, just I've really enjoyed my time here and look forward to staying here as well. So y'all see my face, you don't need to see it again. But where I really wanted to start was talking a bit. So I went to school, I'm from Nashville originally. I went to school at Auburn University, which is a really wonderful architecture program. But part of what I really enjoyed about being at Auburn is that they also have an interior architecture program. And so this image on the left is really, it's an image of Rural Studio. I think I saw on the call that there's someone who I might have been in a dinner party at their house many, many years ago, but this was a really wonderful professor that I had, Dick Huggins. And so he basically sort of, at Rural Studio, there's this great course where you really learn about how to draw historic structures and understand sort of what comprises all of them. So we spent a lot of time cross-legged, sitting down, doing just hand sketch after hand sketch, but it was also understanding those spaces and then really digging into the details that I found pretty fascinating. And that was in addition to all the amazing things that Rural Studio offers, which is recycled materials and a lot of the things that folks see. But this class in particular for me was transformative and really, sort of pushed me to the next level in understanding where I might want to be in the next few years as an architect. So in that course, we also took a couple of trips, one of them being to New Orleans. And when you bring a group of college kids to New Orleans and try to keep them dedicated, it's very difficult, but they were able to do that. So we sort of went all over the place, but I do remember that, and that's part of how I ended up landing here. The image on the right is when I was also studying in Genoa, Italy. Again, another very historic space, but where I also sort of saw what happens when a city that's much older than New Orleans has had time to grow, and how you end up growing in that city. So a lot of my professors there, really all they did were interior architecture projects. Very few actually got to work on the exterior of spaces. And so that was also very informative as I continue to move through my career. But one of the buildings when we were in New Orleans, and I think this gets back to one of the early questions that Laurel Faye asked and Nathan when we got on this big rowdy call with a bunch of architects weeks and weeks ago, trying to figure out what this session of dialogues is about. It's that, what is your favorite structure? And I think I had a really hard time answering that question at the time. And the more I've thought on it, it really was the Pito House. So the Pito House for me, in this sort of transformative experience of seeing what happens when you have historic shutters, a Caribbean space, this house that is truly lived in and feels lived in and loved in 2004 was just sort of magical. And the image, I dug and dug and dug in my archives to find this image, but the image on the right is essentially that's one of the first images that I took in that space. But there's something about the way that the paint changes the light on the white walls on the interior. But when those spaces are open, it's just magical. Obviously, the image on the left is something that is just, we all know it. We drive by it sometimes and think it's just a regular house on Moss Street, but I think that's part of its charm. And you feel that now when you go to events there. It doesn't feel as precious as some of the older structures in town. So, just sort of, I think to answer that question, that's really the space that as well was pretty exciting. And then there were things like this. We went out. Oh, you got a question?
That was a generous plug for Peace Out House, and I'm sure that folks, if they haven't been to a Vino on the Bayou event, will want to do so now. It's a wonderful place to go have a couple of glasses of wine when the sun's setting. But
no,
yeah,
absolutely,
I think one of the things that I think about with Pete Out House and with those kind of West Indian colonial style houses is how climate adapted they are. The exterior circulation, the wide eaves, the brick floor on the ground floor, and the primary living space above. Some of it's basically French architecture imported to this world, but it's so climate adapted. And I like that image with the light coming through the louvers there, because that's also a way that it's interacting with the climate, with the exterior natural world, in terms of the light that I had not thought about before.
Yeah. No, I really love that space. And every time I go back to that space, it's ever evolving and changing. And it's sort of where an event might be happening, or the spaces that we can sneak into. It continues to unveil itself as you move through it. So the next thing I wanted to show is just the other side of New Orleans, which, if you know our work, we do a lot of I should say more traditional sort of transitional spaces and historic conservative projects, but we also do weird and wild. And we love anything that has to do with food and drink. And so part of this is that experience of Preservation Hall and that light changing in this historic space that you cannot make. Preservation Hall can't happen anywhere else. And so, understanding that is also part of having this historic fabric that is still intact, that is hot, that is unair conditioned. It's unair conditioned. You almost pass out in the summer when you're there. It's just wonderful. And then also on the other side, I live in Bywater. I love Vaughn's. It's a space that same thing. It's this neighborhood corner store, that's converted to bar. It's sort of, it's the other side of it. So I would be remiss if I didn't talk about some of those spaces as well. And then there are things like Courtyards, and you'll see this a lot in our work. We work a lot with the Courtyard space of the exterior as a 5th or 6th room in a project. So we do try to reserve funds for that. We look at it as an interior space. We bring on really wonderful consultants to help us execute these projects as we're working on Courtyards. But, Soniat House, Pharmacy Museum, just wanted to show sort of a nod to that as well, as we're looking at different spaces.
Well, that's reminds me of your EDR pedigree, because EDR is known for putting courtyards into projects like the New Orleans Bio Innovation Center, for example.
Yeah, and it's become something that we started, and I'll show it later on. I mean, Coppervine is the first project that we executed as Studio West, and that has a really wonderful courtyard that's very visible from the street. But we find clients who often will call us and say, I have this really terrible space, can we make it into something? And then it becomes, okay, well, what else can we do? And so I do think that the courtyard inherently, I don't think if I was living somewhere else, that would be part of our daily discussion as we look at spaces. And then sort of looking, I think, at some of the more contemporary and historic structures around town. Again, we love more modern work, and we love what some of our colleagues are doing. This is Esky, Dumas, Ripple. My business partner and also husband, Jason Richards, was at Esky, Dumas, Ripple, and worked on both of these projects. But I wanted to just highlight a little bit because I love where some of these projects, like the inspiration, came from. And I think you can start to look at projects a little bit differently from just the exterior component, but really when you start to dive into that interiors piece. And so Maison de la Luz on the left, ACE on the right. The ACE was conceived and happened prior to Maison de la Luz. Both have a similar energy, but are both under the same owner and operator, but have a distinctly different style when you go to the interiors. And I don't know how many folks have gotten a chance to see the interior of Maison de la Luz. It is wonderful. If you haven't, staycation, go get a cocktail. But I think the Ace Hotel, you can see that some of the stuff like the concert space in the middle, a lot of that you can see is coming from things like Snug Harbor, and then it's definitely influenced from some of the other really New Orleans spaces in town. And then as you look at Maison de la Luz, there are hints of, you can feel like the Soniat House, a very classic property that's in the quarter where there's a really special treatment to the stair, and sort of respecting what those interior architecture elements are. I know that Maison de la Luz, both these projects, I believe, had historic tax credits involved with them as well. But, and that is when the Park Service does have more control, has control over the interior of the building, which is wonderful. But it's also a piece of course, we should sort of respect, keep some of these spaces, even if they do take a little bit more love and care as you're doing the work on them.
Do you find when you're buying a building like this that there's a lot of issues with like code improvements that maybe need to happen and maybe kind of interfere with some of the tax credit stuff or the SHPO requirements for the interior?
Definitely. I think every project has a lot of those code components that need to be worked out. I know that this space in general, there is a massive, Maison de la Luz has a massive stair that is, open atrium space that is also kind of the entry that you walk through. And, as you're an architect, you walk through and you start to read like door hardware and additional doors and everything being put in place, but it's all very intentional, but it takes a lot of work. I mean, we basically work between, early meetings with the fire marshal, early meetings with the city on a project, and basically lay out that both, the owner needs to use tax credits from a funding source, and it is part of what's going to make this project viable. But it's also that we really need you to be on board early on so that we can start to look at what, how do I put this? What is going to make this project, safe for everyone that's coming out of it as well. So yeah, no, absolutely. It's definitely something, a lot of times on the restaurants, and I'll touch on it a bit later, the restrooms are always something that we need, first thing to address, and just making sure customers have access to bars. There are a lot of pieces and parts that we go through regularly with that. But that's a good question, Anna. We often hear that it's, oh, we can't do it, so just tear it out. And we say, no, give us a chance to do what we do professionally and come back to you with some options for alternative schemes. So, yeah.
This is a good chance for me to add for our listeners. If you have questions that pop into your mind about any of the images or what Jenny's saying, please go ahead and enter them in the Q&A function if you can. And I will make sure that we get to some as we go, and then also at the end. So we do want to have dialogue between us, but with you as the audience as well. So please feel free to put those questions in the Q&A function.
Yeah, thank you, Nathan. Yeah, so then this is just another pair of images, again, from Sonia House and Maison de la Luz, just seeing what happens when you have more of like, a classic historic New Orleans interior, but really makes you want to, it feels like New Orleans. Like you saw this image, you would know that you're in New Orleans. And I think Maison de la Luz does a really beautiful job of that too. It's this eclectic feel. It's a little bit fresher in its interiors, but same thing, you can have a cocktail, you can be there for a long time and stay on property. So just wanting to show sort of those two pieces next to each other.
Do you find that clients, you were saying, you think people are maybe a little more open to courtyards here because it's New Orleans, and so there are examples around. Do you find that your clients are pretty receptive to color? There's a lot of kind of lush color in these images, these golden and green colors, or do they shy away from bright colors and bold color mixtures?
Where our clients tend to love bold colors. We do have some favorites that we hear, and often we'll have a color palette that is associated with a project, maybe when it comes to us. But the same way that we treat the architecture, we do try to say, like, let us work through some things. Let's find some inspiration. On our bars and restaurants, honestly, it takes a lot of like eating and drinking together to go through some of that and talk through some options on stuff. Like for instance, we have one project right now where we discovered that the chef is just kind of an amateur DJ, and he has playlists all the time. And so we're using the playlist to sort of help inform the color palette of a French restaurant, which is really kind of only for that client and an exceptional experience. But it takes a little bit to sort of unravel that. But yeah, people do shy away from color sometimes, but I think that's when they contact, they want to pay an expert to be able to do that. So yeah, it takes a lot of testing too.
I think what's nice about the Maison de la Luz is that you wouldn't know from the exterior that you were going to be walking into like these rooms filled with like texture and color, and the exterior is kind of like subdued and very, it has, it's very symmetrical, and then you come in and it's just cozy and the lighting is perfect. And again, like you said, you just want to sit and kind of relax and hang out like you're in someone's living room.
No, absolutely. And often too, it's that what we try to tell folks is you don't have to be dedicated to color throughout the entire property, right? We can have decompression spaces where they're a lot more, maybe it's a little bit more subdued. We can have more active spaces. And so trying to make sure that the color matches what the programming is as well is part of what we do. For our team, because we're both architects and interiors, sort of the whole team thinks about this. Even the architect trained team members are fully aware of it. And so that's actually, it kind of works out to our advantage just because we're kind of holistically thinking about the project. Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, so now I'll jump into some of our work. So I think as Nathan mentioned, Studio West, you've seen kind of where we've come from, sort of what inspires us, what we get excited about around town. So I started the practice 3 years ago after working with some really incredible firms in the city that just trained us sort of how to do really big projects that take many, many years, which we love. But I also had some really wonderful clients that had worked with me for a long time and wanted to continue working with us. So it was really a nice leap of faith on our part to start the studio. We started really small. We figured we'd have 1 or 2 projects. We've sort of been very fortunate that we're busy right now. I think a lot of architects are in that boat. But what really makes us kind of excited every day is that we have great clients that we work with all the time. So we have a lot of clients who are high energy, come to the table with a lot of ideas, a lot of opinions about color. Maybe they want to tear out the entire historic fabric of a project. Maybe they want to use tax credits, right? But they know that we'll be a partner along for the ride on that. And often what we tell people is that we also need to be the right fit, because the projects are far too long for us to be on board where we, may not align on some of that. So some of the things where we'll hear, we've talked about this a little bit, Anna and Nathan, prior to the call, but like those projects where maybe we want to remove some elements, maybe that's not the best thing for the project. Maybe it's not the best thing for the brand long term. So that's where I want to jump into 2 projects in particular. One which I know everyone probably knows us for. If you look us up, we have a very small web presence. We're in the process of correcting that. But we have a splash page for Copper Vine because that was our first project out of the gate. And this client was a really interesting one that basically came and wanted us to pick a couple of colors. Originally, it was a small contract for a few paint color selections and really nothing on the interior. And as we dug into it, we said, look, this property has such a rich history, right? It has, it was originally the Maley's restaurant building from 1876. The family owned it and they were live work. So they lived upstairs. They had two buildings. It came down. You know, the one at the eminent domain basically took the one down at the corner of O'Keefe and Poydras. But look at kind of this rich history on site. And it's also historically landmarked, which has worked in our favor in terms of conversations with the client because you can't take it down. And this is where part of our hat comes in with HDLC as well, and knowing kind of what these rules and regulations are. But on this project, they were electing not to use tax credits. And they had used tax credits in the past to restore the original Smith & Walensky's. Let's see, Smith & Walensky's, actually when it turned to Walk-Ons and Happies, the owner had used tax credits on that. And then moving forward, they didn't need them on this project. So it was sort of pie in the sky. We can sort of remove a lot of elements on the interior. And part of those conversations, you can see we sort of got some images of the wisteria vine. It was really well known for that. And we brought that as part of the inspiration for the courtyard, but I'll show you some of the interiors. So this is what it was originally like when we were there. So Happy's, which is like this green faux Irish bar, just a lot of money was spent on it originally. Maybe not the right time or concept for the current. The courtyard was just sort of a hard asphalt and brick. Again, faux French Quartery doesn't really work. And then kind of in the back is a utility shed. So some of the images up on the left, you've got sort of what happened when they originally pulled the two properties apart and what's original and what's not. We're currently working on an expansion of this and some properties sort of to the north. So part of this is actually an HDLC submission where we're showing sort of exactly what we're taking off, which I thought might be good for everyone to see. But you can see the timeline as well. So this original Maley's was open until 1986. And then it's been through a whole host of renovations since then. But
so the portion demolished was like another older building that had been adjacent to it, sort of a party wall situation, and it's where the court is now.
Yeah, so they needed to widen the street at O'Keefe. And so they basically removed that portion in the 50s. And when they took it down, it actually is sort of part of what really crippled this business long term because they didn't have the expansion of the dining rooms. It changed the character of the site. And so that was removed. We also have a massive Entergy vault that is underneath the existing courtyard, which posed a lot of challenges when we were doing structural work for the trellis. But yeah, so all of that being, you know, just sort of an unfortunate series of events. But it's been sort of an unraveling because I think at one point, when this project got landmarked, there were some pieces and parts that were put back together and some things that were also modified. So we've been trying to figure out what's original, what do we keep, where do we go back? And so that's what you can see highlighted here.
Yeah, I remember just before I left the HDLC, you had come in for the architecture review committee to kind of go over some of the dormers that had been added on and removed, and kind of some, there was, I think on the backside, there were just a few that were like all different shapes and sizes. And so I think with the protection that you had for as a designated landmark, it kind of gives you even a little bit extra work to do, because at that point, the HDLC will have jurisdiction of all sides of the building, even if it's not visible from the street. So where there were things in the back, I think that were part of the discussion of that were in the old photos, but not really accurate or not really original to the building, just had been there for so long. So yeah, I think
this one's been a puzzle for sure. And HDLC was like, it's been nice to work with the staff on this one in particular, because it's just on an island. I mean, it's the only historic structure in this space for a while, except for the south, the sort of the Rampart corridor, where there are a few buildings that are protected on that space. But most of these stand alone and again have been modified, because to what you're saying, like no one really paid attention to what was happening at the back or when they were putting it in the HVAC units.
Right. And I think that one of the nice things that you did with the courtyard there is, like, from from where it started at Happy's is that it was so exposed and open, and you're on a major thoroughfare there that it's not really as welcoming. But once you added that trellis and the plant system and kind of working with like the Maley's look of the wisteria, and it kind of gave it back, it brought it back to that like New Orleans kind of courtyard, that like cozy space that's in between buildings and kind of a little bit more tucked in, even though you're sitting on Poydras Street, you know, it still has that like nice feeling.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. This has been sort of a labor of love and a really great client that's been willing to work with us on this and listen to us as we rattle their cage on all the things they want to do. So then I'll flip to, let me, hold on. Oh, yeah, so then just quickly on the bar. So basically the bar here, this was the original image of Happy's. They really embraced anything beer and sort of had modified this over time. So it had a ton of tap handles all over the place. There's a bell in the middle that they used to ring, I guess, as somebody would order whatever particular shot. And when we came here, there was a conversation about what do we do with this, right? Like, is it an eyesore at this point? Do we keep it? Do we peel it apart? What do we do? And so, again, I think part of the conversation was let's remove some of the elements that have been added on and sort of bulked it up over time, but try to retain some of the elements and lighten it a little bit. So we ended up removing sort of this upper portion that you see, and then, you know, adding mirrors, plants, some of the other elements, but I think this was a huge add. And again, on a project where we didn't have historic tax credit protections, it really was an owner decision, and it was not an inexpensive piece. We pretty much, the bar was sagging. We basically ended up rebuilding most of it. So we had to take some pieces off and then provide new structural support throughout, and then put everything back into place. So it was a lot of work, especially on the back bar for this one, a lot of hand sanding to get us where we wanted to be. But I think the end result was really wonderful. And now it's part of the brand, right? So it's, we wouldn't be Coppervine without this really amazing bar, and it's a focal piece. And it's often in most of, you know, their photographs and Instagram moments. So really great to see this sort of come to life and be saved from really kind of a very sad Irish bar situation.
Did they, gotta ask if they kept the bell?
Somewhere we had to match that medallion for sure. But I think the day that we took it down, everyone was very excited. It was Happy's was no longer Happy's. Yeah, but I think it's somewhere on property actually. I have seen the tap tower somewhere around, kind of in a storage room. Yeah, and then just a shot of the courtyard again. It was a really a hardscape situation, just very harsh concrete, a lot of water pooling in the existing courtyard. And then, you know, really there's market lights, there's all sorts of stuff out here, but really an uninviting space. And so then we worked with some great partners, Spackman Moss at Michaels for the landscape design. And they really helped us figure out what do we do to re-envision this space. And so part of it was that we would have this wisteria vine that kind of is a nod back to the original wisteria vine at Maley's, and that could grow on this trellis structure. Additionally, while that's filling in, we would have these hanging planters that are easy and can kind of be changed out seasonally on this site, and be able to kind of fill in and create this veil around the perimeter and give us a buffer between the street noise as well as that courtyard space. So just a really great project to collaborate on, and I think ended up creating something where we don't have a lot of signage on the project, but really this becomes kind of, you know, your signage and your wayfinding tool for where Coppervine is. And it's a great kind of juxtaposition of this modern courtyard space against the historic structure. And I think it adds a lot of value in terms of the types of spaces that we can create. You know, it is one of the more popular seating spaces on site. So we do kind of consider it another dining room space, as they do seat count and everything on site there.
And do you know, was it particularly helpful during the pandemic with the ability to do more outdoor service?
Oh my gosh, yes. So it was, oops, sorry, clicked too fast. Yes, absolutely. So it became way too popular, but obviously not large enough. But Coppervine has stayed open during the throughout the pandemic. And they've, you know, figured out a variety of ways to provide service, as is every other bar and restaurant in town. And so, yeah, I think they've really gotten a lot of mileage out of having the courtyard space, as well as the wraparound balcony on the second floor.
when you were designing the courtyard and this like metal structure, were there any issues with like how, I believe, if you might have to correct me, but I think that they didn't want it really connecting to the building so that it was on its own separate structure.
Correct.
And
Yeah.
if you want to just talk a little bit about how maybe that was a challenge, or would it have been easier just to, strap it onto the building, or, go from there?
No, I kind of forgot about that for a moment. Yeah, that's a good point. So yeah, so the whole structure, it basically we have a standalone steel structure, and it does not touch or lean on the historic structure. And that is part of, so for those who are familiar who are listening, working with the city. So when you have the landmark building, you work with HDLC, but they have jurisdiction of everything that touches the air, essentially. Not just what you can see from the street, as Anna mentioned earlier. But you go through a number of the Architectural Review Committee meetings, which is a volunteer group of architects, all with a variety of opinions, but it's actually really wonderful because it usually comes out with a really great product at the end. And on this one, I think one of the particular details was just making sure that we did not touch the historic structure long term. So we worked a lot with our structural engineers. We worked with Batcher on this, and they were, got creative with us. We also, as you can see in the background, there's an Entergy vault at this sidewalk that runs almost the full length and doesn't quite touch the building. But so we had to bring everything and raise everything above ground. So everything is supported above grade rather than doing any type of foundation work to support the structure as well. All right, so I'll jump into, and this was just, this slide is basically what you can do with video poker / non-code compliant restrooms that were existing. So we did a lot of things with interiors, wallpaper, tile, and sort of opening it up, but it becomes kind of a moment for Copper Vine to have wine in the bathroom, sort of continue to see people as you stand in line. But here they basically had two men and women's restrooms, and neither one of them were really code compliant. So what we offered instead was to have 3 independent water closets that are all, one of them is ADA accessible, but the other 2 are also much larger. So giving you compliance there with, and also providing lavatories, which are just, you can kind of see here, but just sort of opening up and changing the space a bit. But it was a really nice use and a way to keep them, again, not have to tear everything out. There's a stairwell right above here that's original, and so not having to take those pieces out. So I'll jump to the next project, which most people haven't seen because it's pretty new for us. So
hold on,
as I
Jennie,
mentioned,
before you do that, can
yeah.
I interject? Sorry.
Yeah, absolutely.
I failed to unmute. We got one question in the Q&A about the flooring. Could you talk some about the flooring in Copper Vine? Do you have a mix of floorings in there? What choices you made?
So flooring is actually, let me go back. So our flooring choice, for those that know Poydras Street, it floods all the time there. And so as part of our work on the north part of this site, we are, working with the stormwater management and trying to help with some of that. And I know there's some work kind of going closer to City Hall. It's also trying to work on that, but it floods. So this owner had originally had, I believe, wood flooring in here, and it was removed. And so part of our discussion was, do we do tile or not do tile? So this is actually polished concrete that is stained. It took us a few attempts to get the right coloring on it. And I think everybody's really happy with it, but part of it is just that it does flood. It's something that we have to accept. And with the historic doors, all the ones that are operable along Poydras Street, in an effort not to have to sandbag when we have, those couple of year events or even a very rainy spring, not having to worry about taking the flooring out.
Yeah.
And talking on that, just curious, has there been a lot of maintenance to the doors because of that flooding, or because of any water intrusion and sunlight?
We have not had, I mean, we have to paint regularly. That's part of it. We did do quite a bit of work in terms of new door hardware to the existing doors on property. We don't have as much deterioration as I've seen on a lot of projects that we work on. Partly because we've decided that the main entrances will be in the courtyard. And those are, I think partly, a part of this is that these aren't a balcony, so they get some protection from weather. And then the ones at the gallery, the ones that are open to the courtyard. One they use as the main entrance. It does not, those are not original. Those were
Mhm.
added at some point, but we have had to do some work to those over time. All right, so
There's
I'll
some
jump
other
into,
question.
oh yeah, you've got more questions?
I think that was it.
We've got a few by email that we'll
Okay.
get to in a minute.
Sounds good. All right, so I'll jump into, again, a project that is near and dear to us because it will be our future studio space. As I mentioned, we started the firm a couple years ago. We've been growing. In the pandemic, we've definitely grown a bit more. So we're really excited that we've acquired a building and are working on it both for rental units on the second floor as well as our office on the first. This project, so we're in Bywater currently. We intentionally wanted a space in the Marigny and really wanted to be in that, have our home in the Marigny, really kind of embedded in the neighborhood. And so as part of that, we bought this grand old building, as Dorian used to say, earlier this year, and we've been working on it. But I wanted to talk a little bit about what we're doing sort of on the interior of this space and some of the things and challenges that we work through, much like we do with our clients. So the interior of this space looks like this currently. It's a bit dated, but well loved and well used, but it hasn't been renovated since the late 80s. And so at the time, obviously, sort of the way that we work and practice has changed a bit. This office was originally set up for realtors, and it's sort of 8 traditional cubicle style desks, all very well detailed. But they sort of extended the platform. And the challenge for us is that we work a lot with the community. We needed a space that was really at ground level and more accessible to everyone. So our plans for this are to remove basically that platform in the middle and all of the desks that are associated with it, and then sort of return it to the original historic floor. But on a project, we wanted to use ourselves sort of as this for this conversation, because these are really the same things we face with most of our clients. Is we walk into a project oftentimes before someone's even purchased the building, and we're figuring out ideas for what they want to do. And even in our space, walking through with the ceiling, I mean, the Preston ceiling in this space is wonderful. It has been painted over and over again for many years, to the point where you can't see some of the detail. If you saw previously on the slide, it has this big wraparound balcony. There's a lot of moisture intrusion that has deteriorated and ruined some of these panels in the space over time, which is just what happens. So it's sort of time to give it its next life, do some repair, but sort of this will be sort of an investment for us to make sure that that ceiling is in good condition. Additionally, we've done a lot of like exploratory work where we've popped holes in the floor to make sure that this tile extends all the way back, because it was originally a pharmacy. And so I just wanted to dip in and show a little bit about what we tend to do with some of our clients as we move through this. So, we started pretty early on with Sanborn map research. We had heard a lot from the real estate agent about what this was, when it was built. But we really went through to make sure that we were fact finding on our side. And so really this building was built in early 1900. It had been, originally it was a masonry building. It had a balcony. It sort of changed shapes over time. And then eventually the residence to the south of it was also demolished and created the courtyard space that we have. But as you can see, we just sort of start to go back and tell the story of a building. And this is partly what we love doing with our clients, because it sort of gets everyone excited about what was this, and that you're more of a steward of this space. We also do a lot of research. So we do more research maybe than we should. Sometimes we work with historians and consultants on this. This being our project, we were doing a lot of this after hours, but it was a lot of archive digging. So we found sort of original pharmacist, the original one who moved in and had his 2 kids. He lived upstairs, had his pharmacy on the ground floor, and this was an investment for him. He got in trouble a lot. He got his license suspended. He moved around town. He had a few other pharmacies, but we sort of found all of those things and pulled it together. And then, sort of found the last resident pharmacist in the space. And he was really there, I think, until the 60s. The space has also been a beauty parlor. So there's just a lot of like digging, but we find that this is really informative as we go back to understand what the interior fabric is. and understanding like, why is that tile floor there? Well, that was the extent for us of the shop floor. And then moving back towards some of the walls, well, this was actually where you had a platform where you probably came out. So knowing what some of those things are and the original openings that are in the space. So we do a lot of that research, both for us and our clients. And then again, we draw a lot, and that's just part of it. We measure a lot. And so on this, like for the ceiling tiles, we've moved back and forth. We reference a lot of the NPS briefs, which is the National Park Service technical briefs. We're really well versed in those, kind of the same way we are with building code, but we know those and we like to use those as we're looking for solutions for restoring things. So in terms of the ceiling, there are a lot of ways to do this, whether it's blasting, dry ice blasting, hand scraping, but really kind of leaning on folks who maybe are out of town and have done a lot of digging on this as well. So I just wanted to show that slide.
Have you
And then
found
in
it
some-
difficult? Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Have you found it difficult to find someone you might be touching on this now, but someone in town that actually does this kind of work, or, finding that professional or even being able to get repairs to it done?
Yes. Yes, I think often it's hard to find folks. There are a number of very amazing craftspeople in town. Like, we work a lot with our subcontractors. But I will say this, everyone has an opinion when they walk in. And we're like on this project, we really don't want to use a lot of caustic fume. Like, I don't want to compromise the subcontractors that are working on this, even though that labor may be inexpensive. And so a lot of our research has been about what is a sustainable alternative and how do we do this effectively without ruining or pitting panels.
Right.
So yeah, so we do a lot of that. We also have to work a lot with, it's a lot of like, we're going to test on this panel, we're going to look at it over here. It's a lot of conversations back and forth, but I think that the biggest thing to say is like, you'll hear 100 solutions for the problem as you walk into this, and it's sort of looking to the experts on it. So yeah, we found some really great people, but it's definitely takes a bit of research as well.
This isn't something you can like take down and then put back in. You have to do it in place, or is that?
You can.
Yeah.
We've priced taking it all down. There's
Okay.
actually a really wonderful method that I've really wanted to try until I got the quote on how much it would cost to take this down and put it back up. But there's a method actually where it's been proven in a couple places they'll drop them into chest freezers and peel the paint off. And of course, I had visions of in my free time doing this, which is a terrible idea. But yes, there's definitely for us, and especially because it's an architect's office, and we're budget conscious as we are with our clients, but especially with ourselves, we are doing this. We're leaving the ceiling in place.
Yeah.
But there are a few things like we've been working with. We're working with a group out of Missouri right now, and they're fabricating replacement panels in kind. And because these ceilings were installed all over the country, we did a lot of research on where they might have found these at the same time period and who might have sourced them. And so we're able to actually find that they had some in stock because this pattern was a pretty readily used pattern. And then in some cases, some of the trim pieces and the cornice pieces don't exist anymore. So getting those fabricated as well.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so I just wanted to end on a touch and a teaser kind of for our studio as well. But we're really excited about the space and can't wait to show it off when we wrap it up later this summer.
Cool. Well, we got a question about the flooring. Do you know when that tile flooring was put down? Was that when it was converted to a pharmacy at some point?
We believe it was in place early 1900. So like with the original in the building. Reason being there's I don't know if I have it in the photos. I don't think I put this one in there. There are some, you can kind of see it here. There's some edges where they've matched it over time, but we sort of cleaned an area of it and you can see where some of that does appear to be original.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I love the shop windows, the vitrines on that building on the sidewalk are very cool.
Yeah, it has a really good feel. But yeah, I think it's going to be a good space for us. Yeah.
Well, given what you do, you've got to have a good looking office, interior and exterior, right? You got to make a good first impression.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think, for us, Dorian had this building since the 80s, and he was an amazing caretaker of it, and talked about it very fondly. And I think it's a good fit for us, but I think also for him, as he retired, that we were also a good fit as the next kind of caretakers of the building as well.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, we got another question in the Q&A regarding lead paint and other harmful materials. How often do you run into things in an old building, lead paint, asbestos, something else like that, that complicates a project or influences your choices?
Often, almost on every project, but we do test for that. So on this one, we tested this one for lead as well. But we recommend to owners, just, we need to know what, if we have asbestos, especially on exterior, we run into that a lot. Roofing shingles as well. A lot of flooring materials, the adhesive underneath, we can usually kind of tell from the size of the tile and walking the site. But we do call and we just get inspection. We get, test reports for that as well, but that's, it's definitely a real thing, but just, you have to mitigate it and deal with it.
Yeah. All right. 2 more questions about the Copper Vine project. So one person's asking about what the flooring choice was in the courtyard.
Oh,
or
okay.
What's underfoot in the courtyard, and another about whether specifically SHPO and the Park Service had reservations about your choice to go with concrete floors on the interior.
Okay, so I'll answer the first one. The flooring in the courtyard is we decided to leave the concrete because of the energy vault underneath, and because of floor height differences. So we came up with an idea to do outdoor rugs, which are pretty inexpensive. They're really reliable long-term and can be power washed. So we layered the rugs in the courtyard, and I can show that here. So you can see the different patterns. Believe it or not, these are Amazon rugs, and arrived very quickly, but is a really good way for us to mask some of the things that we have. They're also porous enough that the water can get through to some of the drains in there as well. Yeah. And then in terms of, what's the second question, Nathan?
Just whether when you decided to just do polished concrete on the interior space, did that give any grief to SHPO or the Park Service? But this wasn't a tax credit project, so
this was not a tax credit project.
I guess, so had it been one, do you think they would have objected, or do you have any comparable experiences?
I think it depends per the project. In full disclosure, I have not asked the Park Service for a project where we had polished concrete. Obviously when we do that, we do vet through the materials and the selections with NPS, both with SHPO and NPS as well, if it's state or federal.
Yeah, well, I can't say if what this question is getting at, is that was a choice made because of the repeated water intrusion. There are now some Park Service guidelines on flood risk reduction for rehabilitation, which means theoretically things like elevating a building to base flood and wet and dry flood proofing can actually be not just compatible with tax credits, but potentially eligible for tax credits. But it's very much at the cutting edge of the practice, and we're still waiting, hopefully going to get illustrated guidelines coming out in the next year or so, and hopefully have some example projects in New Orleans in the not too distant future. People begin to understand how it's actually going to work in practice.
Yeah, and I think some of the floods in the last couple of years, we did some work with Hostel International on Canal Street as well, and they flooded twice prior to the Hard Rock collapsing. But we had looked at some options as well for flood mitigation, and that was all worked out because they're working with PRC on some of the easement components as well as tax credit offices as well.
Stay tuned.
Yeah.
So another question we got via email, which maybe is something you're thinking about as you look to design your own new office space, is what are some design trends to avoid? You know, especially in historic settings or historic homes. What are people maybe tempted to do because it's trendy, but they should really avoid it? Or, you know, what will you steer people away from?
Oh, so I have a lot of conversations with folks because we are architects as well as interior designers and interior architecture, about demolishing every wall in your house, and really getting rid of sort of the original room layout. So I don't know if that's a specific trend necessarily, but I find that often sort of that open home design sometimes gets rethought over the years. So maybe there's a way to think about keeping a portion of the wall, or at least some of the remnants of, original crown molding in some of those rooms, so that sort of where the original rooms were. There's a lot of conversations about fireplaces.
That's what I was about to touch on.
My heart sinks, and if anyone, we see these all the time at HDLC, my heart sinks every time I hear someone tell me they've taken out their fireplaces or their chimneys. And so that's also something that we have a lot of discussions about, in terms of the interior fabric of a home, because again, it from the exterior and from the interior, it gives you that original room configuration, and it's part of what gives you the rhythm and makes the New Orleans historic fabric what it is. I mean, it's always a shame when that happens. Anna, you can probably speak to that more than I can because you're on staff, but yeah,
it was definitely a common application for people wanting to remove their fireplaces to create that open floor layout. One of the things, actually, when we were filming the Maintain Right series, the short videos that are going to be coming out, I walked through with Chris Kornman on a project on Uterp Street, where this homeowner was doing the complete opposite. They were making all of their fireplace functional again. And that was so refreshing to see that somebody was actually putting in the time to be able to actually light a fire in some of these, because although I'm sitting in front of one, it is completely closed off.
yeah.
And we no longer see that. Sometimes you'll have the metal grate still there, or some of the historic features still there, but it's really hard to carry the weight of that actual chimney that sticks out past your roof without the actual base of this. And then discussion really came back to how the fireplaces really were a structural element of the building, and that people don't really realize how they are part of almost the foundation of the building. They're holding up, giving that building the support to the framing that are holding your floors and to the ceiling, if you have a second floor and all that, and how it's so tied in. And so I totally understand why it seems like it's just an easy fix, just knock it out. But really, you're going to create so many problems with structural elements when you are considering that. So definitely think about it when you're wanting that open floor plan. But I think it's a nice, like what you said, that those fireplaces create a rhythm in your building. They show that the room layouts that were previously there, and they are part of the history of the building and the structure.
Yeah, and I hope that's on your Maintain Right, or can potentially be one in the future, about a little bit more information for folks on fireplaces, because it's just such a shame.
Yeah, we definitely talked about it a little bit with Chris, because he's working on actually making them function. So that was just we were just curious on that process and how you create the venting for it. And actually, especially a lot of these that were just enclosed, or some of them were even, they were insulated with wood. So you got to go back and clean them all out, get all the dirt out. You don't want to also light your first fire for their homeowner and it be just a combustible situation pretty much. So, he says it's been a lot of work and it's been really interesting, but we did do a little, hopefully there'll be a little short video coming out in, the next couple months on that.
No, that's great.
Well, we have one question from a viewer that's very practical. So you knew you wanted to have your office in the Marigny. Do you have any off-street parking, and was that a factor for you? It sort of gets at the urban design decisions of a business owner.
So we do not have off-street parking. Currently, we are officing, just full disclosure, out of our house due to COVID, and we have a few folks who come over during the day. We don't have off-street parking here either. We plan to be good neighbors, but it is not required for the zoning on this site. We did check that. We do have the possibility, because we have the lot adjacent to it, to be able, you can sort of see the gate in this photograph. You can fit a car to there when needed, maybe during Mardi Gras. But yeah, we don't plan to have parking. We are providing a shower because we're thinking like sustainable, like some of our, some folks may want to bicycle to work and things like that. So we are sort of planning for that as well.
That's great. Yeah, I was thinking
Yeah.
more from a client perspective. You know, does your client expect to have a parking lot, or are they willing to?
Oh, I don't know. I mean,
I don't know what intent what was the spirit of the question, but I was just thinking from
maybe
that perspective.
we travel a lot of times to our clients. We're on site a lot. So I figure if we have a client who really needs a parking spot, I will move my car if needed. But I think most of our clients are pretty forgiving on that front and are used to being in an urban space.
That's great. Yeah. And presumably they were, realtors working out of that space before.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I'd love to hear a little bit more about just your experience forging off on your own and starting a firm. I mean, I think the perception of architecture as a old boys club is increasingly wrong, but not entirely. We certainly have some great, female architects from several generations in this city. But, going off on your own for anyone starting a business can be daunting. And then now you've taken it to the next step and you've purchased a property as headquarters. So what's that been like for you as you've made each of those successive steps?
So I am a huge proponent of women architects, and actually co-founded Women Architecture in New Orleans as well. It has been a struggle, I will not lie. New Orleans is both being a transplant as well as a woman in a firm has been a challenge. All of the places that I've practiced, and I have watched it for years, but I can say that I think it's slowly changing on the practice side. I can tell you that my clients have changed much faster than sometimes my colleagues. And so at the end of the day, my clients have sometimes instilled more energy in me and just, really believed in us than sometimes some of my colleagues have. And so I've found that so encouraging that I don't see the sexism as much with a client, but pretty instinctively if there's going to be an issue having a female architect on a project. I'll say this, we know what we're doing. And so I think that's really valuable. And even coming on a project where we encounter contractors all the time that may have a problem with that. And so I think often we win them over with the fact that we're coming to the table as problem solvers and we're a team on it. And for those that we don't, they may or may not be in the team of folks that we work with all the time. And I think that's okay. But, we love to, we hire kind of a younger staff team because both Jason and I love to teach. We've been mentors at every firm we've been at for years. And I think that's part of it, is having mentors who really sort of believe in you and instill the fact that you're, it's 2021, it's move on. I mean, at some point it's just sad when that's still something we're talking about. And hopefully in the practice too, I'm just hoping that, we have a gender is one component of it. Equity is a completely different section, which we have not tackled yet. Commission is working currently to see if there's a way to provide more ARC members. We're always looking for more commissioners. But I think in general, that's something that really is just sort of we're still lacking in that in the profession. But yeah, thanks for asking that. In terms of going off on my own, it's terrifying, but I love it. I don't think I do it any other way. We have so much fun, and I can, go take some crazy projects that maybe we couldn't have taken if I was at a larger firm. Our scale is a much wider variety. So we work on stuff. One of our projects, we've got everything from right now, our largest project is 10 million. And then we've got projects down to 200,000. So but it's really about, we can kind of go and figure out what the right fit is. And so I love it. I mean, it's a lot of paperwork. We rely on a lot of talented other folks and consultants to help us. But yeah, I don't think I'd change it at all.
And how important to you was it to have like your own space, like that usually someone would just rent an office somewhere, but like having a little, really a corner of the city.
So I desperately I want my house back first and foremost. Anyone who knows, we love to entertain, but I work way too much. I work almost every weekend and all the time, which is most small business owners, I think, and even most architects who are not their own firm owners. But I need my space back. I think second, it's for us, it was a choice not to go into a co-op space or sort of get a desking component early on, because we found that a lot of our clients had spaces we could share. So we weren't paying kind of a rent overhead component. So we knew, I knew very like month 2, I was like, all right, we're just saving money, not putting it towards desks. And we'll kind of reinvent the way that we work a little bit. So everyone has laptops. We've been working on Zoom prior to pandemic. We have all of our software in the cloud. And additionally, we go to a lot of our clients, but we have some that, like, when we have a deadline, we can office with them temporarily in a conference room space. They like having us on site because they can bug us all the time about their projects. And so that was just a conscious decision. But from our side, for an overhead, we kind of squirreled money away and made it possible to purchase a property. And then I think just for us to be able to be a client is a big piece for us. We really want to sort of practice what we preach and be able to go through the entire, tax credit process, selecting the GC, which is very difficult right now, given cost of materials and sort of variations in labor in the market. We just wanted to try our hand at it ourselves. We may be terrible at it, who knows, but we'll find out. So yeah, it was really important.
I think that's actually one of the questions in our question somebody had asked, do you work or have a contractor that you particularly enjoy working with?
Oh, we have lots of opinions about contractors. We have, we're very fortunate. We have a number that we do enjoy working with, but we do love contractors who are very transparent with us. Don't mind, understand kind of quality. A lot of our clients do change stuff in the field and on the fly, like something may not be working, which is, in fairness, residential, that happens all the time. And we do have a handful of residential clients that we work with, but just sort of understand that, like, we're all on board and we're all a team, and everybody kind of needs to be in it, because we always tell everyone, like, it's too long of a process to work with folks you don't want to talk to all the time. And so a lot of our contractors, they're good friends at this point, same with our clients, but yeah, we have a couple that we do like.
We have one other question, going back to Copper Vine. Were you concerned about settling in the patio, so subsidence or things becoming uneven, the broken sidewalk scenarios we see all over the city? Or is that not an issue because of the Entergy vault and whatnot?
The Entergy vault takes up about 50% of that. So if it settles, we have a real problem. Yes, that's been something. We have a lot of cracking out there. There's actually, in the expansion, there's some plans potentially to do a different flooring material out there that's a little more forgiving, but we would probably put that, like we did tile, we would put it on top of the existing concrete structure. So yes, but in some cases it's just better not to touch it, if that's fair. If we end up doing stuff with sidewalks and everything, we do specify kind of, the correct underlayment and everything else for that. But yeah, we do take that in consideration because everything is sinking here, always. We're always fighting that.
It's best if it sinks at the same rate.
Yes, absolutely.
When it starts sinking at different speeds in the same building that you get from.
Yeah.
Can I ask you just a little bit about how much the historic context around a building informs your work? I'm thinking about the difference between Copper Vine, which, as you were saying, is kind of like this island of a historic building surrounded by parking lots and in some high rises, and then a half block away or a block away you get to a few more historic buildings that are also themselves a bit islands, like a little archipelago there in the downtown.
Yeah.
And you compare context to the one in Marigny, where it's much more neighborhood context, and the scale of what's around it is different. Does that influence how you approach a project?
Yeah, so we map a lot of our projects. So we actually go and do like photo surveys of the full block. Oftentimes in preparation for, a submission to ARC or HDLC, and sometimes just for our own information and kind of mapping purposes, we have a lot of like pinup space that we, put everything up. We look at all the time. We're constantly looking at massing and scale, even if it's not particularly historic or contributing property, or is in a space where it's in a partial control and that doesn't really affect it. We have a project, for instance, it's on actually just coincidentally, it's on the block down from this. It's at Mandeville and Royal. It's 2 warehouses. And for that project, I mean, we've mapped 2 or 3 blocks in every direction, just kind of with old school photo surveys that are overlaid. But yeah, we do look at all of that. We also look at like the history on the Sanborn maps. So we have one right now that's next to some friends of ours. So we've been kicking them the Sanborn maps with their house on it. But we also like to know, like, if you look at the Sanborn maps and you look at the history of a site, it also affects like the zoning. So often you can kind of see where these original commercial pockets are and how the map isn't necessarily aligned anymore, which is just kind of good for us to know. We know a lot of folks in Bywater and Marigny. We're sort of around all the time. So it's also just fun because you'll run into somebody at a coffee shop and they'll kind of tell you where you lived, and you might know, oh, I could kind of tell from the map that this or this or this was at your site. So it's just fun to know anyway, as sort of good cocktail conversation.
Yeah, you were showing some of the historic research. You can now find the Times-Picayune Historic Archive online pretty easily through the public library, and search back into the 19th century for a street address if the name of the street hasn't changed, or if you know what the name used to be, and you'll find things like lost bicycle, please return to this address, or so and so won the caption contest for a photo in the Times Picker, all kinds of stuff associated with addresses that turns up in newspapers.
Yeah, we found that on this building. So we found a lot of like, help wanted, like we need somebody to be the runner for the drugs, basically. And then we found a lot of things about how like rents escalated over the years or hasn't for the apartments. Mm-hmm. But yeah, we found a lot of that using the Times Picket. It's made it so much easier now being able to kind of digitally search. And that's kind of one of the blessings I think of it. COVID in this past year has forced a lot of folks to like digitize a bit faster. So we've been able to kind of access more records, even like real estate records. We access that on every project, whether or not it's necessary, because we like to know who the past owners were and how many owners had the building. It usually tells us a little bit about what condition it's in, often if it's had fewer owners or not. So, but right now you can just send that to the city and they send it right back to you. You don't have to go down there and wait anymore, which is really wonderful.
Neat. I will give our last question to one of our audience members who recalls your slide of Preservation Hall and the feeling of being there without air conditioning. He says he heard that they were looking into air conditioning, maybe. I don't know if that's a rumor or perhaps it's true, but what recommendations do you have, or what technologies and approaches do you prefer if you have a client that wants to bring climate control, air conditioning, HVAC into a historic building where it hasn't been there before?
So we love really great engineers who also care about historic structures. And so a lot of that is both where you're putting all of that ductwork, what system you're doing, but a lot of it is actually humidity control. So I should say, we know enough to be dangerous, but we are definitely not the experts. So we do work with a number of engineers on that, especially for one that has not been conditioned in a long time, or ever, which there are a number of buildings for that. A lot of it too, we work a lot with acoustic consultants. It seems like something maybe, but like you really need to know where the air is coming out. And for Preservation Hall, I imagine that would be a really big piece for them, is to have an acoustic consultant on board who could, make sure that you don't have a space where you can have a lot of noise associated with HVAC.
Right.
So we do try to think about it comprehensively.
Yeah, I think one of the things we would definitely want to promote is ventilation. make sure that your spaces are ventilated and there's airflow and you're not trapping moisture anywhere.
Yeah, it's really important.
All right, Jennie. Well, thank you so much for giving us
Thank
all your
you.
time this evening and this insight into your work and what's inspiring you. And I really look forward to seeing the finished product of
Yeah.
your new office when maybe we can all get together in actual person for
Yeah,
a glass of
absolutely.
wine at Copper Vine or
The
take
new
a tour of
office.
the space.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you all so much. It's been great. I'm looking forward to the dialogue in a couple of weeks too with the other folks pulling together. And I know Andrew's next, I think, in a week or a couple of days, a week.
Yes. So next Tuesday's
Yeah.
dialogue is with Andrew Lyles, who's an architect and adjunct professor at Tulane. He's going to be talking about roof design and some of his fascinations with roof design, particularly here in a city where it rains more than 60 inches a year, sometimes 10 inches in a day, as we've had recently. So yeah, you definitely don't want to miss that next Tuesday, and the roundtable on May 25th with our participating architects, and hopefully some other special guests talking about, what does it mean to practice in New Orleans, and what is New Orleans as a community, as a city, and as a place where architecture has been for 300 years. What do we have to offer the rest of the world in terms of style and insights and talent?
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to that, and I hope everyone will come back and join us.
Yeah. Thank you again.
Thank you, Jennie.
Yeah. Hope to see you all soon in person.
Yes,
Yes.
definitely.
All right. Thanks.
All right.
Good
Have a
evening,
good night,
everybody.
everybody.
Yeah. Have a good night.